Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer. It is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Now, today we got some information, some patch notes for the upcoming 3.9.2F patch. These letter patches are usually pretty small deals. Often it'll be nothing more than adding a new cosmetic microtransaction, fixing a specific single bug, and maybe fixing a client crash that comes up somewhere. However, 3.9.2F is the second in the 3.9 series that have been a little bit more significant than that. It's adding considerable additional functionality. So with the numbering system GGG use, essentially there's four characters to it, so 3.9.2 and then F being the fourth character that's sometimes there and sometimes isn't. And 3 indicates that it's in the Fall of Oriath expansion, or not expansion, core game update. 9 indicates that it's the Metamorph League, and then the 2 indicates that it's the second major upgrade. Then the F is just a little patch on that, at least in theory. However, 3.9.2C from memory was the other big one, and 3.9.2F have been big enough that they really should have been 3.9.3 and 3.9.4 respectively. Anyways, the big change that's being made is some of the changes to item filters. I want to go through these here and give you a bit of a heads up on what they mean for players that design their own loot filters. If you don't design your own loot filter, this might still be of interest because it'll give you a sense of some of the customization that is available. Should you decide, that you're playing the game and you think, you know what, I think I'm getting sick of seeing such and such an item, you'll be able to have a look and see how much is involved in tinkering to remove it. This is quite surprising. At the moment, there's a whole lot of things that you can't do with loot filters, and some of those are going away. So let's have a look through this first. The first thing that's being changed is the way that loot filters can detect sockets. So there's Abyss and Delve sockets here, which are a little bit of an oddball. I'm not going to talk about those, except to say that these changes will make it slightly easier to detect if an item drops with an Abyss socket in it. Currently, the only ways that these can be created, there's 2 of them. The first one is that you can use a hollow fossil on a rare item. Hollow fossils are very expensive. They're one of the most expensive of the special fossils in Delve mines. And so hollow fossil crafting is very much a power gamer only niche. And if you're doing that sort of crafting, you generally know what you're doing. On the flip side, there's also Delve specific uniques that drop with 1 or 2 abyssal sockets. These items, these are currently the only ways you can get an item with an abyssal socket in it. It's entirely possible, and the reason I think they might be making this change is to facilitate in the future having items drop inherently with abyssal sockets sometimes. So basically having loot drops that come from some specific encounter in the future where you've got an abyssal socket already in a rare item. Now, abyssal sockets would take up a suffix on that rare item, so this is not always going to be a desirable outcome, but abyssal sockets are pretty powerful, so it would be something that's usually quite good. In any case, that's pure speculation on my behalf. I'm guessing that that's what the plan is. I could very, very well be wrong. Now, the other thing that's changing is that the socketing system, with the socket system, you'll be able to be more specific about what you call up with your loot filter. So, for instance, you can put up a request in a loot filter that all 5 linked items that contain at least 2 green and at least 1 red socket will show up. And the way you do that is by typing in a socket group 5 green, green, blue, in this case, if you wanted 2 green and 1 blue. So that would highlight items that have at least 5 sockets, of which at least 2 are green and at least 1 is blue. This could be quite useful early in a league if you're looking for 5 links that might sell on days 1, 2, and 3 of a league. It's been my experience that 5 linked items don't hold value very long at all at the start of a league. However, there's an exception, and that exception is 5 links that have very good colors or 5 link Val Regalias. those will sell early in a league. And this allows you to more deterministically find them. So you could set up your loot filter to show, for instance, any 5-linked Val Regalia plus any 5-linked chest that contains at least 3 green sockets. That will then point out things that, at least in the current meta, it'll get most good chests that way. So that's something to keep in mind. There's also ways that you can have greater than or equal to in loot filters. So this is more customization that's powerful for sockets. So again, you can show here, as they give the example, you can point out an item that has 5 or 6 links with at least 3 of them being green. Now in practice, where I think you're going to be using this is for low leveling. You might be interested in highlighting 3 or more linked boots that have 3 specific colors. So let's say that you're playing an archer build and you wanted green, 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 and you also have the ability to use a 4th slot if it comes up, and you'll just assess whatever gem to put in that 4th slot when you've got it. You could then say greater than or equal to 3 green, 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 and then your loot filter will take that line and it will highlight both 3 linked boots that have green, 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 or 4 linked boots, whether they be green, 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 red, or green, 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 blue. So that's just a little bit of extra functionality that's coming there. I'm also interested in this mentioning of delve sockets. I'm not sure if this is a red herring or if it's something that's been intentionally put there to tease something about the next update. Currently, delve sockets are only available in resonators, and that's mentioned here. So it seems pretty weird that they'd mention them in conjunction with loot filters, unless there's some specific reason for that I don't know. Next up is the line improvements to Hav's influence for map items. This one seems a bit confusing at first. What it means is that sometimes Zana will sell maps that have an influence type. So she'll sell a Shaper influence map, but it's not a map that's got a Shaper Guardian in it, and it will have Shaper monsters in it. It will drop Shaper loot, similar to if you use a Shaper Scarab on a map. And likewise, there's an Elder version of this as well. I believe these are only sold by Zana at the moment, but it could very well be being set up so that in 3.10 they can drop from random objectives that you carry out when you're playing the game. So maybe you might have an Astral Charts node in the Delve Mines that will drop a map that is Shaper influenced. This again is speculation, but that sounds like what they might be doing. Now here's the biggest change, and it's a really subtle one. Added area level condition. Area level. What this does is it lets you set up your loot filter in such a way that the zone level can be used to influence what shows up on your loot filter. So one thing you can do with this that's really useful is you can set up so that when you are in a level 68 zone, Scrolls of Wisdom show up. And if you're in any other level zone, they don't. Anytime you run out of Scrolls of Wisdom, you can then just go and run a tier 1 map and they'll pop up everywhere. I'm sure there'll be lots of other uses people will find for this. This is really useful for showing low tier currency only in a small percentage of the maps you run. I think there will be people who will put currencies that have low trade value but that you do actually need in some quantities for natural play. And here I'm thinking of things like chromatic orbs. You might decide that you only want to show chromatic orbs when you're in a tier 15 map. That way, you might be confident that you will loot enough that way for your own use, but that you won't be spending lots of time when you're farming normal maps picking up currency items that aren't very valuable. If you do decide to do this, what you would do is you would use add area level equals 82 to your chromatic orb listing, and have it show up as just whatever you put your low value currencies at. Then most of your mapping, you'll be able to ignore chromatic orbs entirely, but every now and again, you'll see enough that you'll be able to pick them up. Next up is added a condition for the number of corrupted implicit mods. This is a really useful one. There's a small number of things in the game that can drop 2 implicit corrupted items on the ground. The only ones that I'm aware of are sextant modifiers. There is a sextant modifier that gives you Gifts of the Red Queen and something else if you put fragments into your map device when you're opening the map. So you open a map, there's a sextant modifier that says there's 6 additional packs of Vaal monsters, and there's a 50% chance to have Gifts of the Red Queen per mortal fragment used. 50% chance to have Gifts of the Sacrifice per sacrifice fragment used. One of those 2 unique strongboxes can drop 2 implicit corrupted rare items. 2 implicit corrupted rare items are usually pretty low value, but if they've got 6 mods on them, and if those mods are useful, then they can actually be really quite powerful. So for that reason, I think it'll be good to be able to always see 2 implicit corrupted items. Most of the time they'll be rubbish, but sometimes they won't be. Next up we have added mirrored condition. So this allows you to point out when something is mirrored. Mirrored items, traditionally they were only able to be created with a Mirror of Calandra, so they were always very valuable outside of ridiculous mistakes. But over time, they were added when the Ambush League hit. They were added to strong boxes, and then when the Prophecy League hit, there was a prophecy added that caused items to drop mirrored sometimes as well. These 2 conditions mean that the vast majority of mirrored items that drop are actually worse than the item would normally have been. And I know in a previous league I had a 6-link chest item that dropped from one of those strong boxes that's mirrored. So I got a 6-link chest that was fully craftable and also a mirrored version of it, which is no different to a corrupted 6-link chest. It couldn't be modified in any way. Because it was very early in the league, and because this chest was still superior to a tabula rasa, I was able to sell it. But in a more mature league, you couldn't sell it for anything more than the vendor price of 1 divine. So what I think you're going to want to do is show mirrored items. If an item is mirrored and 6-linked, you want it to be divine orb tier or higher, but perhaps not the exalted orb tier that you might put a 6-link craftable base item at. If an item's not 6-linked, then being mirrored is probably a decrease in its value. However, I would still never hide mirrored items completely unless you know what you're doing, at least if you're someone who does sometimes aspire to earn enough currency to pick up and use a Mirror of Calandra. And the reason for that is that if anything goes wrong and an item drops on the ground while you're using it, during a botched weapon swap or something like that, you want it to be immediately obvious that that's the case. Next up is the continue command. This is something that will be of interest to people that have not necessarily a programming background, but an algorithm background. This is actually really quite useful in that it tells the game to keep reading ahead. So what you can do here is you can tell the game to hide items unless you later tell it otherwise, and then you come back and you overrule this continue command. This allows you to set up more complex either-or chains. It will allow greater customization in loot filters ultimately, but it is also going to be something that I do not recommend using this unless you have a very solid understanding of Boolean logic. If you do understand Boolean logic well, then definitely play around with this to your heart's content. Lastly, there's an interesting line here. Any enchantment now only recognizes labyrinth enchantments. It's my belief that that amulet anointments and a couple of other things show up as enchantments in loot filters at the moment, which is a little bit annoying. Anyways, I believe that these changes are just essentially a bug fix in a way. They make it so that choosing to have an enchanted item, choosing to highlight enchanted items is handled a bit differently. Anyways, these loot filter changes, for people who design their own filters, there's a lot of extra flexibility here. I think this is a really good set of changes. For people who don't, these will mostly feel unnoticed, but they will mean that popular filter generators like Neversink, like Stupid Fat Hobbit, and the like, they'll have more flexibility to make their filters fantastic. So I think this is actually a really major improvement to the game, something that will be quite beneficial to a lot of players. In terms of the other things in 3.9.2F, the Jesus feature, if you like, of this patch is the filter changes. There's also a few other things that are significant. Improved performance related to monster and minion pathfinding. I believe, and I'm not sure of this, that the game slows down a lot when there's a lot of monsters on the screen. And when I'm talking about a lot of monsters here, I mean you've got Tezatosh the Beyond Demon firing raging spirits at you at the same time as you've got a couple of packs of Veritania's mobs that summon the little ravens to attack you. You know, you have dozens and dozens and dozens of monsters on the screen at once. It's a difficult mathematical problem to solve, to get all of those monsters to try and path to you with as little running into each other as possible. This is just a difficult mathematical problem that then puts a decent amount of strain on both the server and your PC. This then causes your game performance to lag. This is obviously not ideal, and so hopefully this performance improvement actually does work there. Summon Raging Spirits builds in particular should find that this will be, well, at least if this works, Summon Raging Spirits builds will find this to be a really good change. Now here we have the Cyrus Changes. The following items now allocate to the map maker when they drop. Timeless Jewels, okay, that's not Cyrus. Ivory Watchstones, i.e. all of the Cyrus only consumable watchstones. Awaken Gems, Awakener's Orbs, Conqueror's Exalts, and uniques from Legion, Blight, Metamorph, and Conqueror's bosses. This is a huge improvement. Something that's been a continual bugbear for anyone that plays a build that is not good at killing bosses. There's a really good culture amongst probably 90% of the player base, where if you've got a build that's great at killing bosses, and there's an in-game grind like kill Sirus 75 times as there is in the Metamorph League, there's a common approach where you have a you scratch your back and I'll scratch mine basis, arrangement between players, where one player that's good at killing Sirus says, okay, I will kill your Sirus for you, all I want is the credit towards the endgame grinds challenge, all the loot is yours. This is a good deal for both players, assuming that the person that kills Sirus keeps their end of the deal. However, there's a small number of players that offer these services only to then renege on the deal and scam. And so, especially for high value Awaken Gem drops, they'll just be like, "Ooh, nice, I'll take that." And because it dropped allocated to them, there's nothing that the Cyrus zone owner can do about it. So what's changing here is that these unique items and the special currencies and the special support gems will follow the same rules as, say, Uber Elder or Shaper unique item drops. Huge improvement, should help stamp out scamming in this sort of thing, and also by virtue of stamping out scamming should also help build a bit of a community again around these boss services. Reduce damage of the Storm Call skill that Baran influence monsters used. They'll now only use the skill if they have line of sight to you. I've got to say, I'm going to miss the absolute utter chaos that these monsters cause in my private league at the moment. I'm running a private league, the Recalcitrant League, which has a number of hard mods, and it's particularly terrifying for these Baronite monsters. I think it's the Baronite Thaumaturge is the monster in question, where because the league mods include Onslaught, so monsters act 20% faster, it's harder to dodge the Storm Calls, but then they do more damage as well. And they also deal added cold and fire and lightning damage. So there's more chance for them to shock you, to chill you. They don't usually hit hard enough to freeze, but they can shock you, they can chill you, and potentially ignite you. They are really dangerous, and it's sort of refreshing to sometimes get your ass kicked in the game. However, it's probably for the best that these do take a little bit of a nerf. They'll now only use a skill if they have line of sight to you. So they're not going to be precasting it in terms of guessing where you're going to move, which can be a really nasty trap that they can set up. You know, they can cast something on the ground something players do all the time. You're playing a build with traps or with Stormcall for that matter, you'll often precast it guessing where enemies might move. Now, the AI for these Baronite mobs isn't that smart. It usually doesn't guess right, but it's still pretty dangerous to just have them even randomly target. I think we've all seen with Atziri's Stormcalls are a good example. I'm sure that I've certainly been hit by these more times than I'd like to admit, and they essentially target randomly as far as I can tell, yet they're still quite dangerous. You can now use the /hideout command to return to your hideout while in Tane's laboratory. This is just a pure quality of life thing. If you were trying to escape death at short notice, it is still better to log out. And that really only applies in hardcore leagues, or if your character's 97, 98, or 99 and pushing for 100. In which case, if you're in softcore and you're 97, you want to push 98, you probably shouldn't be doing metamorph fights in the lab anyway. But you'll be able to use this not so much as a panic escape, because it's just inferior to a logout macro, but just as a convenience thing. So that'll be an improvement. Be particularly good if you're trading. Improve the performance of Acid Magma Orb and Harbinger Magma Orb effect. That'll be nice. That is just a bug fix. And likewise, this is another bug fix here. Colossus Sword. Another bug fix here. Now this one's a big one. Fixed a bug where the Power Siphon on death effect could be played multiple times on a single monster. This fix also improves the performance of Power Siphon in general. Power Siphon has a pretty over-the-top visual and especially sound effect when it scores a kill on a monster and gains your power charge. It feels visceral to use because of it, but it is also annoying. This fix will probably be the most impactful of any of these minor bug fixes. And then there's just a couple of other, it finishes off with a couple of other really minor crash fixes. Anyways, I think the big takeaway from this is that the item filters will help anyone with a programming mindset, not necessarily technical skills in programming, but an algorithmic mindset, especially if you feel you really understand Boolean logic, if statements and the like, then there's a lot of new tools you can play around with on these upcoming improvements to item filters. Very much worth having a look at if you're algorithmically inclined. If not, you should expect that this will allow loot filter creators to make some changes that will be for the better, that will be things that will mostly hide in the background, but that will have quite a bit of an impact. Anyways, as always, if you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away. I certainly will be using these loot filter changes to make sure that the Her Mask Divination card stops showing up in maps once I'm past low yellow maps. I will stop having the Her Mask card dropping in maps. At least, well, it'll still drop, but it just won't show on my filter. If you've got any other uses for it, though, definitely share them below. Otherwise, going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.